So today we're talking about annual board and organization planning. Um, and really this time of year, as David said, is when we really start thinking about we're wrapping up, we're setting goals for the year. But what do we do to really plan out the year to help us stay on course? Um, so as we go through this presentation, I would really encourage you, if you have thoughts, to share tips and tricks that you may have as well, so that we can learn from each other. I want this to be productive. So sorry, we were putting this together because I know that I'm more productive when I know what I need to accomplish. And so I make a point of mapping out what needs to get done during the year and when it gets done so that I can better prepare. It allows me to also prepare folks for what's coming up. So I'm able to tell my board, these are things you're going to have to make decisions on at the next meeting. Committees, this is what's going to be coming up for discussion for you to be able to take to the board. It just gives me a framework. And without that, I tend to procrastinate a little and been motivated by those deadlines. And so I've really started thinking about how I could create a framework that would help me keep the organization and the board on track, but also to make it so everybody knew what we were going to be doing as we're moving forward. I also spend a lot of time in my role thinking about how I'm preparing SKC for its next leader. I don't plan to go anywhere anytime soon, but we've all been new leaders in the organization, and when things are not mapped out in a way that it's clear, you're always worried, am I missing something? Was there something? A new leader's going to take and make changes and move the organization forward in new and different ways. But I think it's helpful and easier when they come in and can understand the structure, especially around things that have to happen regularly. It allows that navigation for transition. Another reason this topic came up is I visit with nonprofits and I'll say, hey, when's your next board meeting? And I get responses, which I know none of you are this way, but, oh, we need to schedule that. We just schedule one when we need it. Or, oh, we're trying to get one together later this week or next week. Not having regular scheduled kind of governance related things it's not good. It's not healthy for the organization. Board members don't know when they're needed or what's expected of them, and they can't plan around what's going on. Generally speaking, board members that are engaged and know what's going on will let you know, hey, I've got a conflict, or even make the effort to plan around if they can. Life happens. That's not always the ability. But if you haven't created that structure, it's hard for them to plan accordingly as well. Oh, sorry, I lost my buttons. There we go. So, as I think about the year, it really starts with where we all are right now. We're beginning to wrap up 2022, which is crazy because I feel like it just started. But as we're wrapping it up, we're gathering feedback from our constituents, those we serve, our donors, funders, staff, our board. Some of that is formal in surveys. Some of that is informal in feedback and conversations. Some of that is happening in structured meetings and retreats to really reflect on, what's gone well this year and what are challenges. Some of that happened in one-off around very specific events or programs. And some of it is really around the organization as a whole. We're probably beginning to review our strategic plan with our boards and our staffs and thinking about, this is what we accomplished this year on it. This is what's left. Are we wrapping up our strategic plan? Do we have 3 years left? Are we on track? And then beginning to think about, well, what are our goals for 2023? Or Were the goals in 2022 met? Are we on track for future because this is a 4 or 5 year goal? Are we behind? And do we need to reevaluate some of the goals that we've put in place? Because as we all found out, when COVID hit, all of our goals got thrown out the window, and we had to rethink about what does that mean for the organization. And as things are continuing to evolve, sometimes the goals we set and the plans we make are not necessarily the right ones anymore. So we really need to sit down and we think and reflect, and then we begin to set or refine the goals for the new year. So what happened in 2022, and how is that setting the stage for where we want to go in 2023? With that, we begin planning. And what I often do is, with all the feedback, I sit down, I talk to staff, but I also sit down and really think about what are the ongoing items that need to be addressed. So not necessarily goals, but what are things that happen within our organization every month, every week, that we need to make sure we're addressing intentionally. What are the goals for the year? What do we need in order to stay on track in order to reach those goals? What does staff need in order to feel supported? What do staff need in order to own and move projects forward? And what is the best way to address these items? So I take kind of everything we've talked about, what goals we've set for the year, and I just start breaking it down. And I make a list, and I'll share it with you here in a little bit of what from last year. I'm a little behind on starting this year's, but hey, I know that we have incoming pipeline of clients. There needs to be regular meetings around that. Who needs to be a part of those meetings? What needs to happen at those meetings? Or hey, I know that we need to be doing these things, and how can I make those things happen? And maybe that's not a meeting, but how am I thinking about, here's what we have going on, and here's how I can calendar it as we're moving forward to help me stay on track and be able to have conversations with the people that need to be having conversations. So a big part of that is determining a schedule. And first, really thinking about what needs to happen to be able to hit the goal, or in order to address ongoing needs. Is it a meeting? Is it that I need to be intentional about scheduling drop-ins or touch bases that are more informal? Is it things that need to be formal? And how can I structure that? Who needs to be involved in each one? What do they need to be involved every time? Are there people that would just drop in at certain times for certain things, or is it an ongoing group? How often does it need to occur? So I need to be able to touch base quarterly on this because I know that they've got that, or really it needs to happen monthly, every week. Do I need to be the one that leads that, or can I delegate that and have another team member lead it, and they're the ones making those decisions and managing that, and I'm helping to support them? And this can be around group meetings, one-on-ones. This applies to both my staff and my board. Many of us probably have board structures that are in place, and I will tell you what SKC's is. The board meets 6 times a year, every other month. On the off months, the committees meet, and I meet with my board chair monthly. So that structure is already in place, but we go ahead and set that schedule for the year. I believe that setting the schedule for the year is important because you can always change a meeting or make a decision that it doesn't need to happen. But if it's not on the calendar, it gets forgotten or doesn't get addressed, or conversations that need to happen don't necessarily happen. Related to my board, I've discovered that by having the meetings scheduled, they, for the most part, will plan around. If it's a committee meeting with fewer folks, sometimes they'll say, hey, could we reschedule? I have a conflict, and the group as a whole will decide whether they reschedule or not. So I go ahead and in this month, probably we'll go ahead and we will set all of our board meetings and schedule them out on calendars for next year. All of the committee meetings. We schedule a meeting with my board chair, and I actually schedule meetings with my committee chairs to set the agenda for their committee meetings. Again, everything's flexible, things can be moved as needed, but if it's on the calendar, we're going to make sure that it happens or make an intentional decision about something not happening. In scheduling these meetings, obviously I get feedback from those involved about what will work, but I really make a point of making it consistent. It happens the third Thursday of the month, every other month. It is always the first Tuesday of the month. It's weekly at this time, so that there's consistency and the group knows that as they're thinking through things. So when I go ahead and think through this, I really structure a plan, and I'm actually going to share some of those tools as we're working through this. But when I think about my board and my staff, I map out all of the things that need to be addressed in the year. And so I have a visual for that. And then I'm able to share that with my board. So I'm going to share with you what looks a little messy, which is how I use for planning. But then I share at the bottom of agendas, hey, you can expect the next meeting that we're going to be talking about these items, so that I'm setting the tone and they know what's coming up. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And share again. Okay. So what I'm sharing here is what I use to track and manage things that need to happen with my board throughout the year. We have the board, and then I have 4 committees, and that is the way we're structured. So obviously you would need to alter this based on what makes the most sense for your board. Things that happen at every meeting, I do not have represented here, although I do have a list, as we all do. Hey, here are all the things that need to be at this meeting. The strategic plan will be addressed at every meeting. Our financial reports will be addressed at every meeting. I really have kind of the one-off things so that we make sure, A, they happen when they're supposed to happen, and B, that we're prepared for it to happen when it needs to happen. So as I said, our board meets every other month, and so I've indicated that, and then the committees meet on the off months. So in January, we will welcome new members. We'll have a risk management conversation. The board has to approve a 401k match. We need to ensure that board members have signed the conflict of interest and commitment to serve documents. And we need to ensure that everybody's aware of the succession plan and whose roles are what, and if there needs to be any changes. So in December at our committee meetings, based on that, I know that our finance and audit committee need to approve the payout, and they need to make sure they're prepared for that risk management conversation. I also know that the executive committee needs to review these documents and make any changes so that we're prepared to have that set. Then throughout the year, I've also indicated when meetings are in person or, and I assume they're virtual when they're not in person. We have made the decision that we meet in person 2 times a year. All committee meetings are virtual, and the other 4 meetings a year are virtual. We do not do hybrid meetings. It is virtual or in person, and those are decisions that the board has made. So in March, we know that it's an in-person meeting. We know that we're going to review policies and update, and we have set what policies need to be reviewed each year on a 2-year rotation. Committees will review the policies that relate to the committees in order to bring forward any changes. If it's just that they were reviewed and there's no recommendation for changes, there's a process for that. But we've made that a part of the structure to ensure that that happens every year, because sometimes you then come up with a policy that you guys have that hasn't been reviewed in a while, and you go, oh, maybe we should have talked about that. Things have changed. And so we've just made that part of our structure to ensure that we're doing that. March is an in-person meeting, and so I've indicated the in-person meetings because I think sometimes what you can accomplish is different in person or Zoom, and so that makes me think about, hey, what can we do here? We don't have a lot in March. April or May, that's not when some of our busiest times are. There's other work that will be done, obviously, around projects and initiatives, but not set standard things that really have to happen every year. In July, we will accept the audit and the 990 will be provided. And so we're looking over here at this committee, which is our Finance and Audit Committee, and really to be prepared. In May, they're reviewing the audit process. In February, they're reviewing the timeline. The audit will be presented to them at the June meeting, and they'll review our 990 at the June meeting, so that 990 will be provided and the audit can be accepted. In September, we have our in-person retreat with a variety of things, and then these items relate back to these committees and what do they need to accomplish in August, and if there's more that needs to be accomplished, like the client survey, if it needs to have the results in August, it needs to be finalized in June, so it's going out in July. So things that the board would play a role in making final decisions then are moved over. And the way we have things is committees then put things up forward to the board. Our fee pricing, obviously, and so then that has to obviously go to the committee in August. So this is how I have structured out to really stay on track. And I also use this when I meet with my board chair. So I look at this as I'm preparing for meetings with her to say, hey, here's what's coming up. Here are the things that need to be addressed. I put at the bottom of our agendas, these are the things that are going to come up at the next meeting, and here are all the next meeting dates, so people know what's going on. With staff, when I think through what we need to do, and this is 2022, I map it out. So similar to what we were saying, hey, these are meetings that we need to potentially have. How long and how often? So 1 hour once a quarter, I need to meet with my technology folks. Here's who needs to be in those meetings as I'm getting them scheduled. And really walking through, hey, these are the things we need to accomplish this year. And just because something happened this year doesn't mean that it needs to continue to happen in 2023. As we think through, oh, we've accomplished that, or we're more in maintenance and maybe it goes to another group who's going to take care of that as opposed to a big project. But similarly to, we have staff meetings, but really intentionally, what are the other things that need to be happening in order to keep the organization running and folks communicating at the levels that they need to be communicating.